Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. People always ask if there was one moment when I knew my marriage was over. Looking back, it wasn't one moment. It was a series of small things that didn't fit together until it was too late. My name is Jack, and my wife, Sandra, came home from a girls' trip to Jamaica with more than souvenirs. It started about a month before the trip. I finally booked it, Sandra said one evening as she walked into the kitchen holding her phone. 7 days in Jamaica. Just me and the girls. I looked up from the steak I was seasoning. The co-workers you've been hanging around lately? She nodded. Yeah, we all need a break. I thought you said you were saving money. She shrugged. Sometimes you have to enjoy life. That answer wasn't like her. Sandra used to plan everything. Vacations, budgets, even grocery lists. Suddenly she was spending money on designer swimsuits, expensive dresses, and makeup she'd never worn before. One afternoon, I came home early and found shopping bags spread across the bed. You planning a fashion show? I joked. She laughed without looking at me. I just want to look nice. You've never needed all this to look nice. For a second, she froze. Then she smiled. Well, Jamaica's different. I let it go. Over the next few weeks, she started guarding her phone. If it buzzed, she'd flip it over before I could even glance at the screen. At night, she plugged it in on her side of the bed instead of leaving it on the kitchen counter like she always had. The morning of her flight, I drove her to the airport. She hugged me quickly before grabbing her suitcase. Don't work too hard while I'm gone, she said. I won't. Just don't forget you're married. She laughed. You're impossible. For the first day, she sent a couple of beach pictures and said everything was great. On the second day, nothing. No calls, no pictures, no replies. Almost 20 hours later, my phone finally buzzed. Sandra said she'd had too much to drink, slept most of the day, and forgotten to charge her phone. I stared at the message for a few seconds before putting my phone back in my pocket. I didn't argue. I simply replied, Have fun. We'll talk when you get home. Something about that trip had already started bothering me. I just didn't know how right my instincts were. Sandra came home a week later looking tanned and smiling, but the excitement lasted about 5 minutes. She hugged me at the airport, handed me a bag of Jamaican coffee, and talked about beaches, music, and the resort buffet during the drive home. It all sounded practiced, like she'd repeated the same stories several times already. What was your favorite part? I asked. The sunsets, she answered without hesitation. And after the sunsets? She looked out the window. We mostly stayed around the resort. That was the end of the conversation. Over the next few days, she barely mentioned the trip again. The souvenirs stayed in the shopping bag. The hundreds of photos she normally would have shown me never came up. Instead, she looked tired. Not vacation tired. Worn down. 3 mornings later, I walked into the bathroom looking for shaving cream. Sandra was standing at the sink with a pill bottle in her hand. She quickly slipped it into the medicine cabinet. What was that? I asked. Nothing. It didn't look like nothing. She forced a smile. Just antibiotics. For what? A sinus infection. I picked it up on the plane. I nodded once. You should have told me. It's nothing serious. Maybe it wasn't, but something about the way she answered felt rehearsed. A few days later, I came home from work earlier than usual. Sandra was upstairs changing clothes while I cleared off the kitchen counter. Mixed in with a pile of receipts was a folded sheet of paper. I picked it up. It looked like a printed appointment confirmation. Before I could read more than the clinic's name, Sandra hurried downstairs. Oh, she reached for it almost immediately. I forgot to throw that away. What's it for? Just a follow-up appointment. For your sinus infection? She hesitated. Yeah. I watched her crumple the paper and drop it into the trash. The second she walked back upstairs, I opened the trash can. The paper was still sitting on top. It wasn't an appointment for an ear, nose, and throat doctor. It was for a private infectious disease clinic across town. I folded the paper, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and closed the lid. That night, Sandra acted like everything was normal. I acted the same. I wasn't interested in another excuse. If something was going on, I'd find out myself. And this time, I wasn't going to ask twice. Sandra's appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning at 11. She left the house wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and sunglasses. Nothing unusual. I'll probably be back around lunch, she said as she picked up her keys. I looked up from my coffee. Drive safe. You too. The second her car disappeared down the street, I finished my coffee, grabbed my truck keys, and left. I stayed far enough behind that she never noticed me. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a private medical clinic tucked between an imaging center and a dental office. There were no big signs, just frosted windows and a small plaque beside the entrance. I watched her walk inside without looking back. I waited. 45 minutes later, she came out. She wasn't crying. She wasn't on the phone. She just looked defeated. Her shoulders were low, and she stared at the ground all the way to her car. I let her leave before driving over to the clinic myself. Inside, a receptionist greeted me. "Can I help you?" "My wife had an appointment here," I said. "Sandra." She typed something into her computer. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss another patient's visit." "I figured you'd say that." She gave me an apologetic smile. "Is everything okay?" "I guess I'll find out." I thanked her and walked out. There was no point arguing. If Sandra wanted answers hidden, the clinic wasn't going to hand them to me. That evening, she barely touched dinner. "You feeling okay?" I asked. "I'm just tired." "You've been tired ever since Jamaica." I said I'm fine. Her voice was sharper than she intended. A few hours later, she went to bed early. Before turning in, I watched her carry the travel suitcase into the hall closet. She unzipped it for a moment, took out a sweater, then closed it again. She never unpacked the rest. Around midnight, after I was sure she was asleep, I quietly opened the hall closet. The suitcase was exactly where she'd left it. I unzipped it. Most of her clothes were still inside. A smaller cosmetic bag sat tucked into one corner. I opened it. Underneath sunscreen, makeup, and travel-size shampoo was a sealed envelope from the clinic. I unfolded the paperwork. My eyes landed on 3 words immediately: positive laboratory result. Below that was the diagnosis, the prescribed medication, and instructions for follow-up treatment after testing positive for a sexually transmitted infection. I read the page twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I folded everything exactly as I'd found it and zipped the bag shut. At 8 the next morning, I was sitting in my own doctor's office. "I'd like a full STD panel," I told the physician. "Any particular reason?" I met his eyes. "My wife just gave me one." Waiting for my test results was the longest 3 days I'd had in years. I didn't waste them. Sandra had become more affectionate overnight. She asked if I wanted breakfast before work. She reached for my hand while we watched television. She even suggested we plan a weekend away together. 6 months earlier, I would have thought she was trying to reconnect. Now it looked like guilt. I played along. "No complaints here," I said with a smile. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Saturday morning, Sandra left to meet one of the women from the trip for coffee. The moment her car pulled away, I walked into the home office. Sandra owned a tablet she almost never used. It stayed on a shelf because she preferred her phone. I remembered helping her set it up a year earlier, and I also remembered she had enabled automatic cloud backups. The tablet unlocked with the same passcode she'd used for years. I opened the photo gallery. Most of the vacation pictures were harmless: beaches, hotel pools, tropical drinks, and group selfies. Then I opened the recently deleted album. She hadn't emptied it. Dozens of photos and videos were still sitting there. The first few showed the women drinking at a beach bar with a group of men wearing resort wristbands. The next pictures got more personal. Sandra was sitting on one man's lap. Another showed him with his arm around her waist while she held a drink and smiled directly at the camera. Then I found short video clips. They weren't graphic, but they didn't need to be. One showed Sandra dancing closely with the same man long after her friends had walked away. Another showed the two of them leaving the resort bar together, while someone behind the camera laughed and said, "Finally!" The last file wasn't a video. It was a voice message one of her friends had sent after the trip. Sandra played it, but never deleted it. The woman laughed before saying, "I still can't believe you actually spent the night with him. Just make sure Jack never sees those pictures. One vacation isn't worth losing your marriage." The message ended. So did every excuse Sandra could have made. I copied every photo, every video, and the voice recording onto a flash drive I kept in my desk. Then I locked it away. I wasn't angry anymore. I had the truth. Now I just needed to decide how I was going to use it. Once I knew the truth, I stopped reacting and started planning. Monday morning, before work, I met with a divorce attorney named Michael Bennett. I didn't walk into his office looking for revenge. I walked in looking for a clean exit. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finished, he folded his hands. "Do you have proof?" "I've got more proof than I ever wanted." I handed him copies of the clinic paperwork, the photos, and the voice recording. He looked through everything carefully. "This puts you in a strong position," he said. "But don't confront her yet. Let me prepare everything first." "How long?" "A week. Take 5 days." He smiled slightly. "I'll do what I can." That afternoon, my doctor called. "Jack, your results came back." I stepped outside the office building. "And?" "Everything is negative." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Thank you, doctor." It was the first good news I'd received in days. The rest of the week, I quietly separated our finances. I opened a new account in my name, moved my paycheck, gathered tax records, mortgage documents, and everything my attorney requested. Sandra noticed none of it. Instead, she became almost too attentive. "You've been working hard," she said one evening while setting dinner on the table. "Maybe we should take a vacation together." I looked at her. "You just got back from one." She laughed awkwardly. "I mean later. Just us." "We'll see." That answer bothered her. I could tell. 2 nights later, she left her laptop open while taking a shower. I wasn't looking for more evidence, but the screen caught my eye. A search history was still open. One question stood out. How long after treatment should I wait before telling my husband I had an infection? Below, it was another. Can an STD stay hidden for weeks? I left the laptop exactly as I'd found it. There was nothing left to investigate. Sandra wasn't trying to confess. She was trying to manage the damage. By Friday afternoon, Michael Bennett called. "The papers are ready." "Good. You still sure?" I looked through my office window toward the parking lot. "I was sure the day I found that clinic report." He paused. "Then it's time." I thanked him, ended the call, and drove home. For the first time all week, I wasn't wondering what Sandra would say. I already knew. The only difference now was that I was finished listening. I got home an hour before Sandra. The house was quiet. I laid everything across the dining room table in neat stacks. The clinic paperwork, the printed photos from Jamaica, the transcript of the voice message, the divorce papers sat on top. Nothing was hidden, nothing was dramatic, just the truth. At a little after 6, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked in carrying groceries and smiled. "Hey, I picked up those steaks you—" She stopped the second she saw the table. The grocery bags slipped from her hands. "Jack." I pulled out a chair and sat down. "Close the door." She did, slowly. Her eyes never left the papers. "What is all this?" I leaned back. "You've got one chance." She swallowed. "One chance for what?" "Tell me the truth." She stared at me for several seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid one photograph across the table. It showed her sitting on another man's lap at the resort bar. She looked down, then back at me. "It wasn't what it looks like." I pushed over another picture, then another. Finally, I placed the transcript of the voice message beside them. Silence filled the room. Her shoulders dropped. It got out of hand." "No," I said calmly. "You let it happen." Tears filled her eyes. "I was drinking. Everyone kept buying rounds. I wasn't thinking." "You thought enough to hide the pictures." She had no answer. "And you thought enough to lie about the clinic." Her face turned white. You found that?" "I found all of it." She pulled out a chair but couldn't bring herself to sit. "It was one night, Jack. One night was enough. I'm getting treated. I know. I'm so sorry. I know." She finally looked directly at me. "I love you." I shook my head once. "No, you loved having a husband waiting at home while you acted single in Jamaica." She covered her face and started crying. "I'll quit my job." "No. I'll go to counseling." "No. I'll do anything." I slid the divorce papers toward her. "I didn't bring these here to scare you." She looked down at them with trembling hands. "I brought them because I've already decided." She whispered my name one last time. I stood up. "You didn't lose me today, Sandra. You lost me the moment you chose someone else." Without another word, I picked up my truck keys and walked out the front door. I stayed with my older brother Thomas for the next few weeks. He didn't ask many questions. The first night, he handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You did what you had to do." That was enough. Sandra called me every day. Sometimes she'd leave long voicemails. Sometimes she'd simply say, "Please call me back." I never did. Everything went through my attorney. A few days after I moved out, something happened that Sandra never saw coming. One of the women from the Jamaica trip got into an argument with another friend online. It started over something completely unrelated, but it quickly turned personal. People started posting vacation pictures, then screenshots, then more screenshots. Someone shared a group photo from the resort. Someone else posted comments about what had really happened during those late nights. The story spread on its own. I never sent a single photo to anyone. I never had to. Sandra's own friends tore the secret apart. A week later, she showed up outside my office. She looked exhausted. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I looked at my watch. "You've got 5 minutes." She nodded. "I know I don't deserve another chance." "You're right. I've started therapy. I hope it helps." She looked down. "I wasn't that person before Jamaica. You became that person when nobody was watching." Her eyes filled with tears. "It was the worst mistake of my life. It was a choice." She didn't argue. She couldn't. "I miss you. I believe you. I miss us. There isn't an us anymore." She stood there for a moment, hoping I'd soften. I didn't. Finally, she asked, "Is there anything I can do?" I answered honestly, "No." She nodded slowly. "I guess I knew that." She turned around and walked away without looking back. 7 months later, the divorce was finalized. Because everything had already been documented and prepared, the process moved quickly. Sandra didn't fight it. She signed every page. When the judge finalized the divorce, I didn't feel happy. I felt finished. There was a difference. The marriage ended in a courtroom, but for me, it had really ended the day I opened that clinic envelope and realized the woman I'd trusted had already chosen another life. 6 months after the divorce, my life looked nothing like it had before. I sold the house. It held too many memories, and I wasn't interested in living in a place that reminded me of broken promises every time I walked through the front door. I bought a smaller place outside the city with a garage big enough for my truck and enough land that I could enjoy the quiet. Work kept me busy. I started working out again, spent more time fishing with my brother Thomas, and caught up with friends I'd ignored during the marriage. Life became simple again. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped at a hardware store to pick up supplies for a fence I was building. As I pushed my cart toward the checkout, I heard someone say my name. "Jack." I turned around. It was Sandra. She looked thinner than I remembered. The confidence she'd carried for years was gone. She held a small shopping basket and managed a weak smile. "I didn't expect to see you." "I guess not," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I heard you moved." "I did." She nodded. "I've thought about you every day." I didn't answer. She looked down at the floor. "I threw everything away." I met her eyes. "Yes, you did." There wasn't any anger left in my voice, just facts. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry one last time. I believe you're sorry, but you can't forgive me." I shook my head. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I understand that now." I gave a small nod. "I hope you find peace, Sandra." "You too, Jack." She stepped aside, letting me pass. I walked out carrying my supplies, loaded them into my truck, and drove away without looking in the mirror. On the drive home, I thought about the morning I had dropped Sandra off at the airport months earlier. She'd kissed me goodbye, rolled her suitcase through those sliding doors, and promised she'd be back before I knew it. She kept that promise. She came home exactly 1 week later. But the marriage didn't. That ended somewhere on a beach in Jamaica, long before I ever found the clinic report or the photos. People sometimes ask whether I regret divorcing her. My answer has always been the same. No, because the hardest decision I ever made also gave me back the one thing I refused to lose, my self-respect. And once I got that back, I never looked behind me again. Thank you for watching.